Good evening, everyone. I'm Steve Donovan, the Director of Alumni Relations at Trinity College, and it's my pleasure to welcome you to your reunion, whether that's one that was originally scheduled for last June for all the zeros and fives, or one that was scheduled to occur this weekend for the ones and sixes. We wish we could be hosting you all in person on this beautiful late spring evening on the quad, but the world is not quite ready yet. Thus, we'll take advantage of technology that most of us were unfamiliar with a little over a year ago and celebrate your accomplishments via Zoom. We so look forward, believe me, to returning to in-person alumni events this fall, both on campus and around the world. There are several virtual class gatherings and virtual long walk presentations planned for the weekend. And tonight we wanted to start the weekend with a bang. We're delighted to celebrate the success of 4 remarkable alums who have made their marks across very varied industries. And we've asked one of those alums to lead tonight's conversation, and it's my pleasure to introduce you to Paul Sullivan, class of '95. Paul writes the Wealth Matters column for the New York Times and the Money Game column in Golf Magazine. His articles have appeared in Fortune, Money, Condé Nast Portfolio, the International Herald Tribune, Barron's, the Boston Globe, and Food and Wine. From 2000 to 2006, he was a reporter, editor, and columnist at the Financial Times. Paul has also been interviewed on radio and television programs across the country, including NPR, Marketplace, CNN, and Fox News. He lives in Fairfield County, Connecticut, with his family, 3 members of which he tells us have 4 legs and shed. He received degrees in history from Trinity and the University of Chicago. He's the author of 2 books. His first was Clutch, Why Some People Excel Under Pressure and Others Don't. And the second is The Thin Green Line, The Money Secrets of the Super Wealthy. Paul has done so much for Trinity over the years, and you may recognize his voice as the host of a new Trinity podcast series this year titled Beyond the Summit, which you can find on the college's website. And on a personal note, I know he's an avid and talented golfer and one of the nicest guys you'd ever want to meet. So thank you, Paul. It's all yours.
Thanks, Steve. That was quite an introduction. I feel like just kind of turning over to everybody else and going away. I think it's all going to go downhill, at least for me from here. So, but thank you again. I'm Paul Sullivan, and I feel like the pilot tonight. I just want to make sure you're on the right plane. This is Making a Mark, Bantam Experts on Building a Brand. I think it's going to be a lot of fun. We've got 3 great participants. We have Chris Hatch, class of '80, Bryant McBride, class of 1988, also parent of class of 2020, and Jess Sims, class of 2010. So I'm going to go through briefly and give you all their bios, and then they're going to say a little bit about themselves and how they built their brand. Just take a look at your screen. You'll see the little Q&A function. It'd be great if you chime in some questions. I've got a bunch for this great group, but we'd love to hear from you as well. So first off, Chris Hatch, class of 1980, was a psychology major at Trinity. He is the chief executive of Food Banks Canada, a network of food banks that includes over 3,000 community agencies. He was recently appointed to the Canadian Food Policy Advisory Council, which will provide a critical forum to engage food, community, and agriculture leaders on how to collectively build a better food system for all Canadians. Chris had significant hands-on food banking experience, including leadership roles at, and wait for this is a tough one, the Mississauga Food Bank, and as executive director and board chair there as well. He's also past board chair of the Ontario Association of Food Banks. Yet, this Boston-born alum who calls Canada home now began with a far more traditional corporate path right out of Trinity when he went into consulting. Second up is going to be Bryant McBride, class of 1988. He majored in political science at Trinity. Bryant was the first Black executive at the National Hockey League, serving as vice president for business development from 1991 to 2000. Since then, he's had quite an entrepreneurial track record. He puts it in sports terms, 5-1-1. But I think his investors are looking at the headline number, which is netting them about $80 million on $10 million invested. Some of the companies that he's already sold are Football Scouts Inc., which went to ESPN, Fan Nation, sold to Sports Illustrated, My Team, and Vision Sports, both of which went to the Active Network. He now has his one left company called Burst, which is user-generated photos and video. He sits on several boards, but there's one great passion project I'm hoping he will talk about, and that is his being the producer on an acclaimed documentary, Willie, which is about the first Black player in the National Hockey League. I was going to leave this out, but this one last bit still kind of shocks me. He started and completed 26 marathons. 26. It's like, isn't it like 26? It's insane. Anyway, Jess Sims, segueing from 26 marathons to Jess Sims, who's an educator and fitness instructor based in New York. She grew up in Peabody, not Peabody, Peabody, Mass, just north of Boston. At Trinity, she studied psychology and Hispanic studies and was the captain of the women's basketball team. Right out of school, she began working in education. She started with Teach for America in Houston, Texas, led to her become a teacher, operations director, assistant principal, and ultimately principal at Harlem Village Academies. Her self-discovery, though, through educating diverse students has fueled her passion of connecting to communities that oftentimes are overlooked and under-resourced. In 2016, Jess left her master's degree and her career in education behind to pursue her first and obvious love, fitness. A couple years later, in 2018, she joined this company called Peloton, which maybe a few of us have heard of, locked in our house for the past year. But in addition to helping all of us not lose our minds, she's also launched family content to the Peloton platform for kids 5 and older, which allows her to blend her passion for health and wellness through interactive movement and education. Her most recent addition has been bike boot camps, which sounds probably more terrifying than 26 marathons, because as far as I know, Bryant was just kind of trotting along. I think bike boot camps is that's serious. So with that, I'm going to open it up to each one of them to sort of introduce themselves. We're going to go, start with Chris and go for there. So Chris, it's up to you to tell us a little bit about your experience of building your own brand and the Food Banks brand.
Thanks, Paul. First of all, I want to thank Trinity College for this invitation to be here today with on this panel. Looking to having a good conversation. And hats off to you for pronouncing Mississauga properly. That's a multi-syllable location. You nailed it right on. I don't know if you practiced, but Brian can confirm you got it just right. So congratulations, Paul. Most people don't get it right. As you said, I'm Chris Hatch. I'm class of 80 and the CEO of Food Banks Canada. Our organization, briefly, we support the food banking system across Canada, and we support directly 750 food banks, and they in turn support indirectly 2,500 food banks. So even in Canada, we have food insecurity challenges, and so we have over 3,000 food banks we support, and we support them mainly with money and with food. So if you boil it on down, we're shipping food by plane, by train, by ship, any way we can, right across the vast part of Canada. And then funding as well. And it's interesting because most people don't think about branding when they talk about a charity. We're a charity, and they don't think about branding. And I think about this morning, there are 170,000 charities and nonprofits in Canada. So every day I'm competing with 170,000 other charities and nonprofits. I'm competing for people's hearts, minds, and share of wallet. Why share of wallet? Because we're totally run on donations in terms of our funding. And our funding comes from all different levels of stakeholders, or you can call them customers. For profit, we have the government, we've got foundations, we've got individual people, we've got multinational corporations, we've got national corporations within Canada. We have very wealthy families in Canada that support us. So our stakeholders, our customers, our brand has to appeal to a broad range of stakeholders to keep us going. And I'm really, really proud to say this past year during the pandemic, and then we'll talk about more of it, our stakeholders came out and drove to support our mission and our brand to help feed those who are hungry across Canada. And we sourced over $190 million this past year, which is a 4-fold increase over the year before the pandemic. And our job to get the money out, get the food out, and so forth. So brand's critical. And I know we'll talk more about brand research and brand protection, but so I'm here representing the charitable sector and how important maintaining your brand is, your brand reputation, and brand competition. So those are my opening comments, Paul.
Thank you. Jess, you want to take it next?
Sure. Thanks again for having me. I'm super, super excited to be sitting amongst all these giants. Yeah, so my career path has definitely been a bit non-traditional, and even my job, my career, as Paul said, I am a Peloton instructor, and most recently, I just added on in-arena co-host for the New York Liberty. So I've merged my love of basketball. Now I'm working with the WNBA, which is really, really amazing, as well as being a Reebok sponsored athlete. And so branding. It's funny when Paul was just giving the bio, whenever I hear it, the further I get away from my career in education, the more I'm like, did that actually really happen? Or who's making this up? And then I'm like, oh yeah, no, I have the gray hairs to remind me of the teaching days. But yeah, I did teach for America. I always knew. I walked into Ferris, and I'll never forget. I walked into one of the restrooms and I saw Teach for America, one day, this and that. And I said, oh, interesting. And so I went back to my dorm room and I Googled it and I said, I'm doing this. And it wasn't something that, if you asked me back then in 2010 why I was doing this, I would have no idea that I was laying down the foundation for my brand. I was a teacher, I was an assistant principal, I was an operations director, I was a principal, and now I'm a Peloton teacher. And so when people ask me, do you miss teaching? My response is always no, because I am still teaching, that I'm still in that arena. Just the actual playground looks different. Instead of being in a classroom with, desks and chairs and young kids, I am in, a set that is broadcasted throughout the world. We just expanded to Germany, UK, Canada, Australia was just recently announced. And so we're really connecting the world through fitness. And since fitness has kind of been integral, it's been the North Star for me with everything I've done. That's a huge part of who I am and how I've started to really hone my transferable skills, so I think that that's my biggest thing is with branding, and is with being a learner, whether you double majored in Hispanic studies and psychology and went on to get your master's in education, and now you're a host for the WNBA, and you're teaching fitness classes in a sports bra and leggings, running on a treadmill. It's all about those transferable skills that all relate to your underlying core values. So at my core, I'm a biracial woman. I am half Black, half white, who grew up very privileged in a lot of ways. And in the past, specifically in the last 2 years, but in the last, I would say, 8 years, I've really come into my Blackness. And through that, I've really cleared my path to figure out what is important to me in life, and that is to be of service to others. And so part of who I am and how I've created my brand is by being authentically me. It's very different, obviously, than a corporation or a business, but it's also very similar in the ways that I want people to, I don't like to stand in the spotlight, but I do it so that other people can step into their own spotlight. And so by modeling vulnerability as a superpower and not a weakness, that is why I'm put on this earth, and to help others elevate themselves, not to try to be a different person, but to stay in their own lane and elevate. So I know we'll talk more about the pandemic in a little bit, but that's just a little bit about my personal branding and how I've been able to stay true to myself despite changing careers.
Thank you, Jess. Appreciate it. And Brian, why don't you close us out here?
That's not easy to follow. That's amazing. That was really well done, and so exactly vulnerable and authentic, which I hope is my brand, is authenticity. I'm doing my damnedest for it to be. My background, I was born in Chicago, but I'm from Sault Ste. Marie, Ontario, Canada, is where I grew up. And as you see, I'm a Black hockey player. Right. So I am way off brand from the start. Right. And then so at the beginning, so my branding of sorts is, what you see is what is not what you get. And that has been a thread and a theme through everything I've done. I grew up in Canada, and I started my collegiate career at West Point before I transferred to Trinity. And that was an unbelievably crazy transition, right? I was just thrilled that they didn't make us march at Trinity. So everything was gravy from there. But it was just such a different transition, and eye-opening and enlightening. I realized when I was 18 years old, I didn't want to be in the army, but I didn't realize I was an entrepreneur. But looking back on it with 2020 hindsight, that's the underpinnings of it, is that I love to build things. I love to do things that I love to do things that are different and not to be pigeonholed, right? So that people expect something, and I generally do something else. And I love to do a lot of things. So as a result of me kind of being all over in terms of, I was at one point I was in the United States Army. At another point, I was, running 26 marathons. I was building startups. I've made movies. So it's disparate and it's all over the place. The thread and the core, I hope, is that I've been authentic and that I've cherished discovery all along the way, and just crazy relentless, like insanely relentless. That's how, as a fat guy, I'm able to run marathons, right? That's the way that works. Not fat, but but definitely not built like a marathoner, right? I'll never forget at the start of one marathon, they asked me if I was working there. It was my fastest time ever. I was motivated after that. But yeah, and but diving deep into the experiences, I was on the board of the New York Roadrunners and helped organize the marathons and take it from a small organization to a large organization. And then worked in pro hockey for a long time. So it's been a very disparate, really fun, follow your passion career. But the underpinnings are just don't get outworked, hustle like crazy, prepare like mad. And part of it, to Jess's point, is, over the last few years, same thing, really kind of dialing. I grew up in very white spaces in Sault Ste. Marie, Ontario, and dialing into that part of my heritage and my world, and really diving deep into Isabel Wilkerson and Brian Stevenson, and books that everyone should read, really needs to read. So it's led me to think hard and long about the rebranding that people of color and BIPOC people need in this country right now. And it's starting to happen, but I hope it accelerates. So I'll leave it there for now.
Thank you. One thing I'd love for each of you to address is, as you introduce yourselves, each one of you began doing something else right out of Trinity. And, that's obviously a testament to the liberal arts education that we all were able to enjoy. But I think even, Jess, who's 2010, the rest of us, when we were coming out of college, there wasn't really an idea of branding, of like having your own brand. Brand was like toothpaste. A toothpaste is a brand. A person isn't a brand. But now it's almost essential. Like, who are you? What do you stand for? What is your brand identity as a person, as an entrepreneur? Whoever wants to go first can go first, but I'd love to know, particularly for any of the younger alums, what was that sort of transition point where you thought, okay, I need to either change my own personal brand, or I need to brand, my organization in a better way, because that's going to help me accomplish my goals and to reach the people I want to reach. Maybe Jess, why don't we start with you?
Way to put me on the spot.
Sorry, nobody raised their hand. What am I gonna do? I gotta pick somebody. It's the way the squares go. You're right there. So
yes, yeah, no, I'm good with wait time. That I had to be patient. I had kindergartners when I was a teacher. Yeah, so I was just thinking about. It's funny because the word brand, I never heard that in terms of me until I was at Peloton. And so I guess I can say that I started thinking about my brand when I was making the leap from education into fitness. So I studied it. So just like Bryant was saying, being relentless and like hustling and working hard, people think that I just magically snapped my fingers and I went from, wearing clothes in the classroom to, being in fitness clothes, but that's not what happened at all. I went to every single boutique studio in the city. I studied instructors. What makes this a top instructor? I studied their music. I got my personal trainer certification. I went on Instagram and realized like, oh, wow, Instagram is really your business card. Especially, I mean, in pretty much every field, but I can just speak specifically about fitness, health, and wellness. That's your business card. So you hear that someone's a trainer and you're like, oh, wow, they look like they're in shape. You go to their Instagram, and if they're not really posting very often, they're not really inspiring you, you're going to just forget about them. So what makes you special? And that's where the branding comes in. And so I ended up getting a professional photo shoot. I would start taking more videos of me doing my workouts and being real and honest. I remember, I think the first post that I ever did was, it was just a short quote that said, begin anywhere. And I wrote this little caption that just said, I don't know what I'm doing, but if you want to come along on this journey, this is me. And I've adapted. I've grown so much, and I don't hide any of that either. I know that some people try to archive, photos that aren't as flattering or, different things that happen, but I admire that and I appreciate that because that all helped me get to where I am today. And so then coming into Peloton, they're very, very selective with their instructors. There's only 30, I want to say there's 36 right now in the world, and they cast you. So they would never want another person that has the exact same background as me because I'm already there. I already have that presence. My brand is already there. And so I have Peloton to thank in a lot of ways because I've done a lot of self-work, asking myself all the time, why do I do the things that I do? What wakes me up in the morning? What keeps me up at night? Those are the kinds of things that go right into my work because I teach at 6 o'clock in the morning. I teach at 7 p.m. I teach on the weekends. I teach on holidays, and that's real. And I love that I'm able to be myself and take all of that work that I've done as an individual and infiltrate into my brand. So that's what I would say there.
I would.
I was going to go to you next, Frank. So I would love to know, sort of how you use what you learned in the NHL, which is, of course, its own gigantic brand, but use that to create these different sports ventures, which have all been, successful on different levels, and giving each of those ventures their own brand, and you, as the leader of them.
Yeah, I mean, I think to begin with, as you say, Paul, the NHL is such an, like the other big leagues and, like the WNBA, they're just such monster brands, right? They're Uber brands, if you will, that everyone knows. They're household names. And when you're working there, one of the things you quickly realize is that everyone returns your phone call. Just because you work at the NHL or you work at the WNBA or the NBA or whatever, right? So, that's the first thing that you realize, the power of that brand that kind of subsumes everything. And my job at the time was to grow that brand and to use the marks and indicia and the intellectual property to expand it. So we did deals in Europe and, Finland, Russia, Sweden, all over the place. And that brand carried so much weight. The second you leave, it's gone. And one of the things that I'm most proud of in my career is I can count on one hand the number of people that have not returned my phone call since I left the NHL, because I made sure to return every phone call when I was there. And I did my best to be gracious, to be earnest and to be authentic and really self-aware that I was representing not just that shield and that logo, but myself. Right. And everything that I stood for. So that transition after I left, to your question, was a real it was crossing the Rubicon of sorts for me, and that I had to, as you said, I had to ensure that I kept true to who I was, and that I returned those phone calls and hustled and did all the things that I did while I had the cover of a big brand. And then in terms of those smaller entities that did not have the name and did not have the cachet of something as big as that, just ensuring that the teams that we built there returned all those calls, we're gracious to people. We're not toxic. We're respectful of all people, right? Before it became important in the corporate workplace, right? Because it wasn't for a long time, as you guys will attest. It was a free for all, and HR was about putting out fires. But now it's about making sure that everyone is included and feels as though they belong, or at least it's supposed to be. Hopefully so. But we did our best to do that. Do that from day one, and as a result, our people felt, I hope and think, people felt great going to work. They felt great working with each other, and in turn, and really importantly, it made our clients feel great, right? That authenticity, and I know I'm overusing it, but it's just so true. Telling people, as Jess said, and I think that's at the heart of it. Not having to be perfect. Hey, we're going to make mistakes. We're going to fall down, but we're going to get back up, and we're going to come back stronger and better and faster and harder and jump higher, hopefully. But that vulnerability, looking back on it, that vulnerability is not just important, but I think it's crucial to building a brand, to be able to say when you're wrong, because as and especially I think in a world of social media, people will call BS in a second. They just smell it a mile away. And once you lose your credibility, your authenticity in that way, then it's really, really uphill from there. So just being candid and honest and true to people, whether the news is good, bad, ugly, whatever, right? People are cool with it. It's ripping a Band-Aid off. It hurts for a second and then it gets better. So try to stay true to that.
Brian, your comment about, sort of HR nightmares. I've been a journalist for 25 years, and I remember the first guy I worked for who taught me a lot, but his brand was like insane curmudgeon. Like, this is in the 90s, and like he smoked the cheapest cigars in the office. And after he hurt our feelings, which he did regularly, he offered us M&Ms, and somehow we didn't know, but like that was his brand. He was like, central casting, insane curmudgeon. He like watched, went to horse races all the time. And I look back, I'm like, I don't know where this guy came from, but it was a different type of brand. Chris, when I turn to you, I want to talk, you and I, this is a plug for Beyond the Summit. We're in our season 2 coming up. And so Chris and I got to talk a couple weeks back. And I know that he had a really great, interesting corporate career before he went into the nonprofit space. Maybe you can talk a little bit, Chris, about how, what you learned in your corporate career about branding and how that's helped you really work to do your best to solve some of these really serious food insecurity problems in Canada, and to raise the money and get people aware of, the brand of a very important nonprofit.
Sure. And as in terms of my own personal brand, I 25 years in the high-paced corporate world, traveling globally as a consultant. And then I happened to go visit my local food bank in my city of Mississauga. And I could not believe, I was absolutely overwhelmed by the size and scope of the operation. I had no idea. I was actually clueless the amount of hunger in my own backyard, in my own community. And that was a kind of an epiphany for me. I was like, wow, I need to help this out. And so I went from the corporate side to the charitable nonprofit side and brought my skills and abilities and branding and other things to the nonprofit sector. And the intrinsic rewards have been incredible over the last 20 years in the charitable sector. And in terms of brand, I'm on what I found in my new role, or my role is I'm the spokesperson initially in Mississauga, and then most recently nationally. I'm on national television, I'm on the national news, I'm on national radio, national print, and I have to be the spokesperson. I am the spokesperson. I am the brand for Food Banks Canada, and delivering tough news. I mean, I have to deliver a very sensitive message about the level of food insecurity, the number of children who go hungry in Canada, and the need, and then turn around and ask for help. Trust us to take your donation, whether it's food or money, and do the right thing with it. So I think Jess and Brian talk about being genuine, being authentic is critical, especially when you're on such in the spotlight. You can't be otherwise. It's important to your brand and it's success of your brand, because they look at you and say, well, you are the food bank spokesperson, and you represent food insecurity, And so they're really linked quite tightly together in terms of what we do and how we position ourselves. And as then mainly with our donors and our stakeholders. And we do two things. We try to enact change with government. Part of our mandate, part of our mission is to make social policy change at the federal level so people don't have to go to a food bank. People can get people out of poverty, out of food insecurity. And the other part of our agenda is to feed people today that are hungry. So one's an immediate need, one's a long-term need. And so balancing the messaging and being real, being sympathetic. You know, one of my challenges, my brands, I never lived with food insecurity. I never lived in a household that didn't have food in the refrigerator. So I don't have lived experience. So, but I've certainly worked with, met with, talked with, and know a lot of people that have. And so being able to tell their story as well is important as part of our brand. So that's what I bring day in and day out to the organization nationally and even internationally. I sit at the worldwide table for food banks across the world representing Canada. And so I'm sitting with my counterparts from all the other countries around the world and have to represent our brand and what we do in Canada. And that's a huge responsibility. So it's a huge responsibility I feel on my shoulders every day. Feeding, before the pandemic, we were feeding over 1 million people a month in Canada. And that number's only gone up and up and up since the pandemic. But so it's a great responsibility. It's also a great joy. It's a great privilege that I've been entrusted with to really fill this mandate at this time. So I'm just sort of making the organization stronger, better. So for when I move on.
I want to kind of, take the last couple of statements you made there, Chris, about how the pandemic changed everything. Maybe I'll just kind of mix it up, put this first answer to Brian. But when you think about, what you'd been building over the years, and you had success, things have been going along. There have been certain, I guess, predictable challenges. I mean, at one point, I think we call them known knowns and known unknowns, but things that you could sort of see happening. I mean, there could be a recession, there could be, a funding problem, almost, in air quotes, normal corporate entrepreneurial problems. But then the pandemic hits, which nobody envisions, unless you read the new Michael Lewis novel, the book, which I'm reading now, which evidently a lot of people envisioned, but the rest of us didn't. Brian, when you think about that, what happened to, how did your brand have to change, and how did you have to think differently about what you were doing with Burst or some of these other companies if they were still in your portfolio? But how did you have to think differently, last March when the world changed so dramatically, but also so immediately?
It was an immediate, for me at least, it was an immediate recalibration of what was important. Above everything else, are my kids okay? Is my wife okay? Is my mom okay? When am I gonna be able to see her? When am I gonna be able to see my dad? Those became, everything else just went dialed way down, and that went right up, right? Are my friends okay? Who do I know? I mean, I live in Lexington. I have a place in Harlem. We know 12 people that died. Because it was disproportionately Black and brown people, right? And that just, and when I tell people in Lexington that, or I tell people that are not living in Black and brown communities or don't have an attachment to those neighborhoods, they're stunned. But that's just what happened, right? And the pandemic, I can't unlayer the pandemic from the social awakening that happened literally in lockstep with it, right? So it was jarring on two levels, for me at least, in that there was the social reckoning that went on in the country, via, as a result in the wake of George Floyd. And it was sort of I guess the word that encapsulates them both that jumps out to me is irrefutability. What we were going through was irrefutable. It was once in a lifetime. Oh my God, batten the hatches, everybody get through this, right? And we're not quite there, but almost. Parallel that with the experience of that poor man, and as a prism into the lives of Black and brown people for 400 years in this country, all brought to that one point on a street in Minneapolis, Minnesota. And it was jarring. It was jarring, right? It was jarring in that it was business as usual in that it happened. And then the immediate response from those that were guilty of doing it was, oh, no, it was nothing. It was his fault. And it just wasn't true. And so it just unpeeled all of these layers and all of this like reckoning of, oh my God. So for me, the pandemic was just so infused, those things were just woven together so tightly that looking back at it, I'll never forget that was the pandemic for me, making sure that my family and those that I loved and cared for, friends, family, were safe, and employees, that everyone was safe. And then, we had to keep the business running and do everything from that standpoint. But it just became all about the safety first, and then reflection on the irrefutable things that were happening to us, that where there was no gray. All of a sudden, everything was pretty black and white for a while. And it'll be interesting to see if that maintains, or if it kind of becomes gray again. I hope not.
I want to come to Jess at the end, but Chris, maybe you could talk a bit about, during the pandemic, the need for your brand, the need for Food Banks Canada to serve people. But again, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but I'm guessing the difficulty of getting people to come to a food bank when you're perhaps, afraid to leave your house, or you're wary of your fellow Canadians. And what were you doing to, reach people so they knew that, if they lost their jobs, if their food insecurity had gone up, what were you doing to sort of, reach them with your brand, to sort of reassure them that you would be there and you'd be able to help them?
Well, like Bryant did, hit fast and hit furiously right across the country when the pandemic hit. And, we, like Feeding America down in the States, we had a perfect storm where we had people afraid to come to the food bank to get food that they needed. We had, seniors told to stay home. We had people who thought food itself was contaminated and had to be wiped down. And then we had volunteers not show up at the food banks. Our food banking system across Canada is mainly run on the backs of volunteers. They stopped showing up because they were told to stay home and isolate at home. So some of the food banks were barely being able to open their doors. And then you couple that with the food supply chain disruption that we had immediately. Remember the shelves being empty at the grocery stores? Well, we had issues in Canada. There was a shelf, some of the shelves were empty. We had trouble getting product across the border from Canada or into the shipping ports to Vancouver and Montreal. So we buy large amounts of food. We had major food shortages happening. And at the exact same time, we started seeing a surge in demand. We started seeing more people saying they needed food. They started losing their jobs immediately. So we had a perfect storm. And so what happened, which is really turned interesting, is that the Prime Minister Trudeau was on TV. We didn't know about it, and announced to the nation he was going to give $150 million to Food Banks Canada. So he thrust our brand, and he thrust our name into the spotlight of the public. And they entrusted us with $150 million and even more since then. And he depended on us to help feed those in Canada, his Canada, our Canada, that were hungry and food insecure. So it hit fast, it hit furiously. We were resilient as a system across the country. The people who run food banks, big, small, and in between, really were heroes. They really showed their strength. They came out, they stayed open. They were the frontline workers. And they're there to serve. My role, to your point, Paul, was to make sure the public knew we were open, we were safe, we had protection, we had PPEs, we had hand sanitizer. We were shipping hand sanitizers to all the food banks. We were safe. So I had to assure that if you needed food, please come out and get the food you needed. The other thing that happened, which we think will stay after the pandemic, is 70% of our food banks immediately overnight, put in a delivery system. They put in an online delivery system where they were shipping the food right to the houses. So people didn't have to leave their homes. And so this has proved to be very successful. And so we think that's going to continue post-pandemic, where we see apps where people can literally order the food they need in their household. The food bank packs it up and actually delivers it with volunteers to their home. So a delivery model. So something very positive that's come out of the pandemic. So we had to change rapidly and get the message out, and then we had the support from the Prime Minister on down, which was great. We even had We even had a town hall with the Prime Minister who thanked us publicly for what we do, again, strengthening our brands, which is great. Now we have to maintain it and live up to the reputation of our brand.
I want to turn to just the last part of this question, but I also just want to remind people who are watching us that we do have that Q&A button at the bottom there. So if you have questions, I have plenty of questions for these three great alums, but if you have some, I want to invite you as well. Jesse, one of your majors was psychology. And so when I think of sort of the world of behavioral economics, which is psychology and finance kind of mushed together, they talk about different biases, like the anchoring bias and the survivor bias. And I bring this up because, Peloton and its trainers, instructors like you are one of the great sort of success stories of the pandemic. But it wasn't preordained. That's the survivor bias. So we look back and say, of course, Peloton's doing great, but that wasn't, why. We could have gone one way. We could have all gotten in a lot of shape, or you could have gone my way and had like Margarita Monday. So, it was kind of one way or the other. But I remember, when it all started, all of these Peloton trucks were going like couple, month or so into, we're going down our street. And I remember my wife saying like, I'll just buy one of those on eBay later. This isn't going to last. And of course, we all know that you couldn't get a Peloton now if you wanted to. You get a black market Peloton. But when we talked earlier today, Jess, sort of the pre-call, you said that I think it's for a couple months, you weren't in the studio and you were having to sort of adapt to things being different. And then, Peloton found a way to bring all the instructors back and get you in there safely to work. But what was it like? You'd worked so hard, 2 years before the pandemic to get that brand as a Peloton instructor. What was it like when suddenly it shifted? And what were those, first couple of months like for you individually? And then, when did you realize like, okay, this is going to be different than I thought, but I think it's going to be okay?
Yeah, great questions. Well, it's interesting. I was nodding my head when Bryant was talking about his first reaction, because that's exactly what it came down to. All of the extra things that fitness and wellness was like, oh, I want to lose 10 pounds. I want to get the fanciest equipment. People are just like, I just want to move. I feel like my mental health is suffering because I'm not able to get out and go for my runs because I have to stay inside. I can't go to my gyms. It just got so simple again, which was so beautiful. It was just, oh my gosh, you have resistance bands. Like, I'm going to come over to your place or send them over to me. It was just beautiful to just get back down to the basics of loving movement. And so I struggle with your question, because me as an individual versus me at Peloton, there was a lot of stresses because one, I got COVID at the very beginning and I was very symptomatic and it was very scary. I live by myself. I have dogs, but they're not very helpful with that. And so it was very scary for me as an individual. And two, the world depends on us as Peloton instructors. So we're not just up there saying, 5 more reps. We're saying you can do hard things. How you show up for yourself is how you show up for everyone else in your life. Drink as you pour, as my girl, Chelsea Jackson Roberts always says. You cannot, put on the oxygen mask for your kid before you put on yourself, because you need to be able to take care of yourself first before you can do anything for anyone else. So it was a very tumultuous period back in late March, early April of last year. And we actually closed down the studio for, I want to say about a month, so we could figure out, adapt, because our goal is to unite the world through fitness. And ironically, for the first time in all of our lives, and hopefully for the rest of our lives, everyone in the world was experiencing the same thing. Now, of course, to different varying degrees, 100%, Black and brown communities experienced it way worse. Different countries experienced it in different ways, but we were all experiencing something at the same time. And Peloton is set to unite the world through fitness. So we felt this immense privilege. I wouldn't even say pressure. I would say privilege, because everyone is stuck at home in lockdown. London several times, and that's where we're based too. We have a studio out in London. There's only 2, New York City and the UK. And I felt this immense privilege, like, you know what? I was chosen by whatever higher power, whatever we decide to believe in, to be on this earth during such a crucial time. And I don't take that for granted. I don't take that lightly. And so at first it was just, I'm so grateful to move my body. Let's all move our bodies together. And then, as Bryant was saying before, with George Floyd, with Breonna Taylor, with Ahmaud Arbery, there are all these things that are happening. We're now not only in a pandemic, we're in the biggest social justice movement ever of our time, but ever in the history of the world. And so then I had that on my back. And instead of saying, poor me, or, oh, this is the pressure, I'm like, I don't want my workouts to be an escape from the real world, because Black and brown folks can't escape this. And I didn't want it to be this escapist thing. I wanted it to be practice. So one of my key things, part of my brand, is we practice doing hard things on the bike, the mat, the tread, so that we feel stronger to do those hard things off the bike, the mat, the tread. And so that's been such a huge part of my brand, is using the feeling of lift, like doing dumbbell snatches or pushing your cadence and resistance on the bike or running up a hill. That's hard. And that's preparing you for the hard stuff that we face in life. And so with Peloton, we were able to pivot and to adapt. And so our team is so incredible. We have so many different teams at Peloton, and they put together these gorgeous, huge trunks that weighed 1 million pounds with cameras and lighting and extension cords and mic packs and towels and everything you could have needed in the studio. And we brought it to our homes, and there were a handful of instructors, myself included. I was teaching out of a studio apartment. I have since moved, thank goodness, but I was teaching out of a studio. So if you look at the app and you go to those classes, you see, my setup, my beautiful, I have a rainbow color-coded bookshelf, and then my bed is right next to it. That was not fake. Like, that was an actual studio. And so it was such a tough time, but I would not change anything the way that Peloton handled it, the way that I handled it, because I was growing through it as I was going through it. And it was a beautiful time to, again, model that vulnerability as a sign of strength, like admitting that I don't have everything figured out. I don't know what I'm doing, but I'm going to show up, because it's not about being right. It's about getting it right.
That's great. This is an alumni panel or sort of virtual, alumni weekend for two big classes, but it makes me think, and whoever wants to take this one first, I'll try not to put anyone on the spot, but what do you think you learned at Trinity that's allowed you to, we've talked a lot about building the brand, but to maintain it, because it takes work. You can't, if suddenly, Jess, one day you stopped posting on Instagram, people say, well, where'd you go? Or if Chris, you can't just say, well, this is what we have. It's very active to get out there. And of course, Brian, I would love for you to talk about your documentary at some point and how you continue to promote that. But it's not something where you can really rest. You have to maintain what you've built. What do you think, what was it in that Trinity education that we all were fortunate enough to receive that's really helped you to maintain that brand and to look into a time, hopefully, when the pandemic is moving behind us?
I would say, for me at least, it was it's really about the importance of teams. I was lucky enough to play hockey at Trinity, and we were lucky and worked our butts off to win 3 championships when I was there. And that was really, just the tone set by John Dunham, our coach at the time and still dear friend. And just being able to look to your left and look to your right and be able to count on the person. Right. So that was so instructive to me that when I got out, and I started to build my own companies, and I've built a bunch of them now, making sure that the person to your left, the person to your right could be counted on, that they were solid, right? They were warriors. They were going to show up, like Jess and Chris, when it counted, right? Because it's hard. Building startups is hard, doing, just having to figure stuff out on the fly all the time, adjust, adapt, meeting the moment every time. That's what those hockey teams at Trinity did. We did it, as a muscle. We were relentless in our preparation and in our ability to adapt and stick up for each other. And I've tried to take that ethos to every company that I've built and worked on, as it pertains really quickly to Now my dog's gonna start barking. We made it pretty far actually, right? Without him barking. But what's a good Zoom call without a couple of good barks in it, right? So you know, to take that to the film, to the documentary, you know, perhaps the greatest example I've ever met of that ethos is a gentleman named Willie O'Ree, who was the first black player in the NHL in 1957-58, 6-team league. You know, he only played 45 games for the Boston Bruins, but he played 21 years of pro hockey, and you know, under really hard circumstances, as you know, as he is usually the only black guy out there. And a secret that he held the whole time was that he was blind in one eye. Lost his eye when he was 18 years old and just didn't tell anyone and pretended he could see. And he played 21, 22 years of pro hockey. Right. So that's meeting the moment each and every time. So much so that when he got a second chance to be in hockey, I was lucky enough to know who he was growing up. I went and I found him. He was in San Diego working in a hotel. Everyone had forgotten about him. Hockey's Jackie Robinson, so to speak. And I said, hey, I want you to come and help me grow the game. And he did that in such a superlative way that it landed him in the Hockey Hall of Fame as a builder, not as a player, but as a builder. And he'll be culminating in this January 18th coming up, 22. He'll be the 7th member of the Boston Bruins ever to have his jersey retired. So that resilience and that meet the moment type of mentality, that's what I took from Trinity, and I've tried to surround myself and gravitate to people who share that.
I would just add on to that. I mean, what I took from Trinity many years ago is liberal arts. It's a liberal arts college, and you just don't hear much about liberal arts anymore. People don't talk. My kids don't even know what liberal arts is, and so the fact that I could go to Trinity and has such a broad array of subject matters, from religion to psychology to engineering, and I took it all. It created a level of curiosity, and this is the lesson I take with me, and I try to pass on to not just my children but people I work with, is to be curious, to be constantly curious, you know, exploring, asking why, asking what if, but just constantly curious about different subject matters, different issues. And that's something I took from Trinity, and it's been a great help for me in my career and even my current position, is to keep asking why and keep digging. And I think, you know, be tenacious, and don't get no for an answer and just keep digging. So with the liberal arts college, the broad spectrum of subjects, I think, opened my mind. And the other is just being taught to be curious. And it's easy to be curious this day and age. So those are two I can very specifically point to, Paul, I took with me from my years at Trinity College.
Yeah, we have, I'd love Jess to take the last bit here. We only have about 5 minutes left, and I know you're about to say something, Jess, but there is something I'm kind of fascinated about that I want to know about you. And that's, you know, you being you know, captain of the Trinity basketball team, and now, you know, Steve mentioned in the beginning, it's the most fun in my life is writing about golf as sort of part of my profession, because I grew up loving golf, and you're the captain of the Trinity basketball team, and now you're involved with the WNBA. What has that been like for you? Like, you know, I can only imagine, probably like me, like as a kid growing up, you're like, well, one day that'll be me. And now it kind of is. You're out there and you're getting everybody. But what's that been like? And you know, when you look back, what were some of the Trinity things that you draw on when you're out there getting the crowd going?
It's so surreal. Like, so in total transparency, this is a brand new gig for me. I've only hosted one game so far, because there's a lot of, I've been to 4 of them though. And I'm, you know, screaming courtside, and, you know, cause I'm so invested. And it's interesting because I was a 3-year captain at Trinity. And I say that not as a brag whatsoever, but to bring this whole conversation full circle, that it's about people. Sure, I love the sport of basketball. I love watching it. I love playing it, but it's my teammates. And in this past year in the pandemic, I've actually gotten on a bunch of Zoom calls with my girls that I haven't spoken to in the longest, because, you know, life gets in the way, kids, marriages, work, you know, moving all over the place, and you lose touch with people. But the memories that you have from the bus rides, from the good times, the bad times in the locker room, the funny things you remember about your coach, it's such an amazing feeling. And also Kobe Bryant passing right at the beginning of right at the very, very beginning of the pandemic, that hit me really hard because Kobe Bryant is someone who I've always looked up to and is a big reason why I played basketball and a big connector with myself and my father, who also played basketball in college. And so talking about that, and then being at Peloton, being in fitness, and then reconnecting with my teammates and having a leadership role. I command the virtual classroom. I am a leader there, just like I was a leader on the basketball team. And sometimes, most times, being a leader is not, getting to tell people what to do at all. It is you showing up. Your teammate had a rough game. They shot 10% from the floor. You hitting them on the back and saying, I'll meet you at the gym tomorrow. I'll rebound 1,000 shots for you. That's the kind of work that leaders that I admire do. It's not the stuff, it's not the things that they step into. So with the WNBA, it's surreal because one of the reasons I got this role is because the CEO and a few other people on the team were taking my classes while they were, in off season, which I'm like, what? Like y'all are taking my classes. I'm geeking out about it right now, just even thinking about it. So when I went, the first game that I hosted, it was with the Atlanta Dream, and 2 of the women from the Atlanta Dream asked me for a picture. I'm like, wait a minute, no, we have this mixed up. I'm supposed to ask you for the picture. And so it's just this amazing opportunity where I'm like, it's the people, it's connecting through sweat, and it's understanding that we are all the same. There's, what our CEO of Peloton, John Foley, one of the coolest things he said, he was on Guy Raz's podcast, How I Built This, which is amazing. And his talk about adapting, he made this amazing twist to his podcast, if y'all haven't seen it, where he interviews CEOs of companies to ask them how they've pivoted during the pandemic. But John Foley said that the biggest thing that he learned from going to Harvard Business School is that there's no one, like the person next to you is not any smarter than any other person in the room. And by walking into that mentality of trying to lose that imposter syndrome of, oh, I don't deserve this seat at the table. Hell yes, you do. Go sit at the table. And if there isn't a seat, go grab a seat and bring one up there because you belong there. And it's your ability to contribute quickly. It's your ability to learn quickly. And those are the things that really matter. So that's what I would say.
That's a great way to end it. Thank you very much, Jess. We've kind of come to the end of our time here. So I just want to go around and just thank everybody again for participating. Chris Hatch, class of 80, Bryant McBride, class of 88, and parent 2020. Got to get that in there. And of course, Jess Sims, class of 2010. Thank you again to all of you. And I hope those of you out there watching us, you enjoy some of the other Zoom alumni events we have planned this week, and hopefully in 4 years for some of us and 5 years for others, we can all be back together again on campus, reliving some memories in person. So thank you again to everybody. I really appreciate it.